Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast where we delve into the mysterious world of cold cases, missing persons, true crime, and the fascinating science that is forensics. I'm forensic scientist and criminologist Asha Walther, and I am so thrilled to have you with me on this journey as we dance in the shadows of the world of crime, shining a light on scientific discovery while becoming another voice for those who need it most. So grab a drink and get comfortable while we jump into this episode together. Before we get into it, I would like to extend a content and trigger warning. This podcast is recommended for persons over the age of 18 and contains explicit content not suitable for minors. We will be covering sensitive content that ranges from sexual assault, physical, mental, social, and emotional abuse, suicide, homicide, murder, attempted murder, and other violent crimes, including crimes involving weapons and drugs. This often extends to drug misuse and other harmful and illegal activity. If you find any content to be distressing, I have listed a number of resources that may be able to help you in the podcast notes. I would also like to remind our listeners that all victims and all perpetrators are someone's loved one, so I ask that any discussions in our group or on social media remain respectful of that at all times. And by listening, you acknowledge that all persons of interest remain innocent until proven otherwise. Welcome to the first ever episode of Exhuming the Truth. This is a real episode this time instead of a pilot introduction. And can I just say, if you're in Perth, Western Australia right now, it is so hot. We have been going through a heat wave for I don't know how long, but it feels like forever. It's currently nearly 5:30 p.m. and it's still 33 degrees. I swear it feels near on 40 degrees. I am so hot. And my study where I do all my recording and all of my work is literally the hottest room in the house. I also had to have a little laugh when I was preparing this episode. So it actually took me a few days to do the research, which is pretty typical. I was really into it, mind you, super hyper-focused, got everything together. And when I sat down to write the script for the episode, I just could not stop writing. I just kept writing and writing and writing. And then I thought, hold on, we don't want this to be too long and too boring. So I stopped and I had a look at the word count and it was near on 4,000 words. And I thought, how does this happen? It was honestly a matter of hours. And completing 2 undergraduate degrees, I remember getting an essay assignment for like 1,500 words and looking at that being like, how on earth am I going to write that? But when I was writing this script, it took me no time at all. So it just goes to show, if you love what you're doing, guys, stick at it. So enough about me. Before we get into the episode, I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping, which I will do at the start of every episode in case there's anything we need to go over. So the first thing I want to chat about is obviously our Facebook group. It is called Exhuming the Truth Pod Squad. I have linked it in the podcast notes. You are more than welcome to join us for discussion or just to read along. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, so it's all coming together. All of the links are in the podcast notes. Next, I wanted to touch on subscriptions really quickly. So when you are coming on to find my podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, you will see a small subscription fee. I want to be super transparent about this. And the reason why I have put a subscription fee, because I know not all podcasts have them. And I felt that I owe it to you to explain what that's for and where it's going. So having this small fee allows me to help more families and give these families the exposure to their respective loved ones. Your cases of interest and their cases of interest will be able to get the spotlight and help these cases along. This also is going to allow my 8 years of university experience, relentless, might I add, to be remunerated just softly so I can prioritize this work over any other work while supplementing my time away from my family and supplementing my time away from my current university research. I really do want to prioritize this because I think it could help a lot of people and I want to get people engaged. Also, lastly, this allows ad-free content, and that's so important to me because the last thing I want is to be forcing ads upon you. We're getting into a case, we're about to hear what happens, and then next minute I've popped an ad in there. I do not want to do that. So some sponsorships and ads are quite irrelevant. In fact, most of them are, so I want to keep it ad-free. So if it's not bringing moral value to Exhuming the Truth, it's not going to be here. So ad-free is the way to go, and this fee contributes to that. All right, I hope you're sitting down. Welcome to the very first episode of Exhuming the Truth. Today's case takes us to the suburb of Bedford in Perth, Western Australia. Welcome to Segment 1, Criminal Profiling. Who is Anthony Robert Harvey? Not a lot of information was known about Harvey at the time of the crimes he committed in 2018, nor was it made available to the public after his crimes made the news. This makes criminal profiling very tricky. When sticking to public information only, we don't have a lot to go on, but sit tight because there's a lot of information in this case still to come. It is reported in several news outlets that Harvey was aged 24 at the time of the crimes he committed. According to these media reports, he had previously held a job in mining up until meeting his future wife, then known by her maiden name, Mara Quinn. It is not known if Harvey had any sorts of savings or investments, such as property or businesses, aside from operating a Jim's Mowing franchise with Mara Quinn. Segment 2, Victimology. 5 individual victims lost their lives at the hand of Harvey. Those lives lost are that of Mara Harvey, who went by Mara Quinn prior to her marriage to Anthony Robert Harvey. Mara was 41 years of age at the time of her death and working as a night fill operator in their local Coles supermarket. She had a history of working in the mines prior to this, which is where she had met Harvey. Her friends described her as a social, happy, and loving individual with a good group of friends who was also very close to her family. At the time of her death, she co-owned the Jim's Mowing franchise business with Harvey, which was said to be operating quite slowly with little income. Because of this, investment properties that Mara owned prior to her marriage with Harvey were sold in order to supplement the lack of incoming funds. The second victim of Anthony Robert Harvey was Charlotte Harvey, who was just aged 3 at the time of her death. Charlotte was the firstborn daughter to Anthony and Mara. The next victims are twins, Alice and Beatrix, both aged 2 at the time of their deaths. The twins were the youngest children of the Harvey family. Finally, we have the last victim, which was Mara Quinn's biological mother, Beverly Quinn. Beverly was therefore Anthony Robert Harvey's mother-in-law. She was aged 73 at the time of her death. Beverly was reported to be at the Harvey residence numerous times in a week in order to help care for the 3 children so that Mara and Anthony could work. Segment 3, Crime Line. It's 2013. Mara Quinn and Anthony Harvey meet while working in Cape Preston, Western Australia, in a steel mine and engage in a romantic relationship. Come August of 2014, Anthony Harvey proposes to Mara Quinn, despite her being 17 years his senior. February the 4th, 2015, their firstborn child Charlotte Harvey is born. The couple soon move into a house on Coode Street, Bedford. Mara had owned this property since 2008, prior to knowing Anthony Harvey. November the 4th, 2015, the couple marry. July 27th, 2016, the second and third born children, Beatrix and Alice, the twins, are born. January of 2018, Mara puts an investment unit she owns in the suburb of Maylands up for sale to substitute for the lack of income from their struggling Jim's Mowing business. On the 23rd of August 2018, Harvey purchased 1 knife. August 29th, 2018, Harvey purchased a second knife. September the 2nd, 2018, Mara, Anthony, and the 3 girls spend Father's Day together in the backyard of their Coode Street family home. The neighbours recall hearing the children playing in their yard with both of the parents present. September the 3rd, 2018. Harvey sends 2 lawn mowing quotes to customers. The first at 6:21 p.m. and the second at 6:37 p.m. while he was at home with the 3 girls. Mara was at work. At 11:30 p.m. or thereabouts, Mara Quinn arrives home from her night fill shift at Coles. The 3 little girls are asleep in their beds. As Mara enters the kitchen of her family home, she is beaten down with a metal pipe in the hands of her husband Anthony Robert Harvey. He then proceeds to stab Mara to death 12 times. She lays lifeless on the kitchen floor of her own home. Anthony Robert Harvey then proceeds to the children's bedrooms, where he stabs all 3 of his little girls to death. It is reported that one of the girls was stabbed 38 times. The other 2 girls were reported to have been stabbed to their eyes. After these unthinkable actions, Harvey showers and goes to bed like nothing happened. The following day is September the 4th, 2018. Mara's mother, Beverly, arrives at the home to assist with the children as normal. She arrives with shopping in her car. Anthony Robert Harvey proceeds to help her carry the shopping into his home. When they were done, he proceeds to beat her with a metal pipe and stab her, killing her in the same way that he killed his wife, Beverly's own daughter. Sometime after the murders, Anthony moved the bodies. He covered them in doonas and left notes upon each of them after taking photos of them laying lifeless. It's September the 6th, 2018. The last day the neighbours could recall Anthony's white Isuzu ute being parked outside the Coode Street residence. Between September 6 and September 9, Anthony Robert Harvey continued to live life as normal. He woke up in the mornings, he showered, he slept in the home where his deceased family lay. He even left to do some mowing jobs and returned home to them only hours after the murders. It's important to note that in the days leading up to the murders, Harvey had written in his personal journal about his plans to execute his own family. His words read, "Tonight, I will kill my wife, bludgeon and smother her to death. Then the real hunting begins, but first, my loved ones." These are the words written in a diary that set out an unimaginable crime. A father who kills his 3 little children, a husband who kills his wife, and then a trusted son-in-law who kills his mother-in-law. Upon leaving for his parents' house, Anthony Harvey sold some of his belongings, as well as some women's jewellery, proceeding to withdraw money from Mara Harvey's bank account while she lay dead in their family home. September the 9th, 2018, after a 15-hour drive, Anthony arrives at his parents' house. There, he confesses to what he has done to his father. "I've done something really wrong, Dad. I hurt all of them," he said. His father calls the police. Anthony then turns himself into the police station. A short time post the confession, police arrived at the Coode Street house, post-interviewing Anthony. They found the 5 bodies within the home. Some officers were so horrified that they were seen crying and holding their heads on the front lawn. September the 10th, 2018, Harvey is charged with 5 counts of murder and appears in a Perth Magistrates Court via video link from Karratha. April the 24th, 2019, Harvey pleads guilty to all 5 counts of murder. Segment 4, From the Looking Glass. From a legal and ethical standpoint, these are just statements made. They could either be very true or very false, but I wanted to paint the whole picture with all of the bits and pieces, so we'll stay on the safe side and categorise them as allegations or hearsay. The Daily Mail Australia reports, months after the murders, heartbroken close friend of Mara Harvey said, "Anthony was lazy. He was a drunk and high man who wanted to spend all his time having fun and partying instead of being a dad. He thought his own wife and children were cramping his style." Contrary to appearances, Harvey wasn't fond of his daughters and in numerous fights with his wife declared that he wanted to be rid of them. He would say that he wanted to be free of her and the girls, that they were holding him back from happiness and that no one cared about him. Anthony didn't handle the responsibility of being the breadwinner well, and he hated that the baby took up so much time. He didn't really want to be a dad. The situation got progressively worse, but Mara thought another baby would bring them together, and she wanted a big family. Beatrix and Alice were born in late 2016, and Anthony did not react well to the unexpected arrival of twins. The mowing business was slow, and Miss Harvey took time off work to look after the children. They had a big cushion, as Mara saved a lot and was very frugal, but the babies were expensive and the business didn't do well because he never went to work, and she had the baby to look after, friends said. She controlled the finances to stop her husband wasting so much cash and handed him money every week. He resented this. He called the weekly handout his allowance and resorted to thieving money from her purse. By the last years of their marriage, friends claim he was drinking heavily and spending about $300 a week on his marijuana and meth habit. He was spending so much money on drugs that Mara's mum had to buy them food, a friend said. Mara's mum was stressed as she spent her money on making sure the kids were fed and clothed. Beverly was said to be at the house almost every single day to help with the children. Anthony hated that Mara was getting help from her mum and that her mum was there so much, friends said. He didn't like her family at all. Her family wasn't fond of him, so he accused them of ganging up on him. Friends even went on to say that he became emotionally abusive, scrolling Mara's phone and insisting on coming with her whenever she went out. Quote, "She was definitely afraid of him. He was an angry drunk and very unpredictable. She spent a lot of time soothing." Friends say he was very controlling, but it all seemed super loving, like he just wanted to help and look after her. Mara rarely let on that things weren't right. She was definitely trying to keep things as normal as possible for the sake of the kids. According to friends, she suspected her husband was cheating, but he would always turn it around and accuse her of being unfaithful. On Father's Day, they had lunch. They played out in the backyard. The day after Father's Day, Miss Harvey dropped Charlotte at daycare and went to her night field position at Coles, while Mr. Harvey emailed mowing clients like normal. When she returned home after 11:30 p.m., Mr. Harvey then killed her in the kitchen. When he killed Beverly, it was beside the body of her own daughter. Segment 5. The Science of Crime. This is my favourite segment because I get to actually chat, and it's obviously science, and science is the best part about all of this because science is fact and it's what helps us win cases. And it's also really cool, and I'm also a nerd. So, usually the science segment will take up most of an episode if we are analysing a cold case or a missing persons case, but since this case is solved and we're aware of who the offender is and who the victims are, we can just go over the science of the mechanism of death, which refers to the cause of one's death, the manner of death, which is the category of the way in which the individual died, and any other evidence or methods of testing. If you are listening and at any point you get confused or you would like to know something in a bit more detail, please write it down and don't forget to join in the discussion, and I'm more than happy to answer those questions for you. So we'll start with the mechanism of death here. So the mechanism of death for all 5 victims may differ. There are no publicly available notes on autopsies for the victims, but with the information that we have, I think for the 3 daughters, we can safely infer that the mechanism of their deaths are from one or multiple stab wounds to any vital organs or arteries. So again, the mechanism is the way in which someone died. For example, if somebody died of a heart attack. So in this circumstance, we can safely infer, I suppose, that because he admitted to stabbing them and they did have stab wounds, that one or multiple of those stab wounds was the mechanism of the child's death. It would just essentially depend on which wound caused the fatal ending, but since Harvey stabbed the children multiple times, an autopsy would then be required to determine that and which one was the fatal blow, which I'm sure they probably have, and they would have needed to present that in court. It's said in a number of articles that Harvey used the smaller of the 2 knives he purchased in the August prior to the murders on his children. So we could also infer that that would be the weapon that caused the fatal stab wounds or wound to the children. So he did buy the 2 separate knives on separate dates, and as I said, one is said to have been smaller than the other and the other is said to be larger. The mechanism of death for Mara and her mother, we could possibly infer might be caused by one or several of the stab wounds they received from the larger knife. Now, this larger knife was described as being about the size of a machete. So if you don't know what that is, have a little Google. That is quite large. We could safely infer that one stab wound did the job, if not a couple, but we can also infer that they may have actually received a fatal blow with the metal pipe prior to being stabbed. Now, this metal pipe was 1.2 meters in length, so it's quite large, quite big, and after sitting down and having a discussion with my partner, who is sort of a builder, he's a cabinet maker, but he does everything. So we were chatting about this metal pipe, and he said, you know, it could take one blow and you could be well and truly gone from being hit with one of those. So we can infer that it was either the metal pipe or the larger knife that had the fatal consequences for Mara and Beverly. Again, the circumstances here around that would have been presented in court either way. We know that the mechanism of death was premeditated for all 5 murders, so that just means that he had the intent to do so prior to doing it. It was not a spur of the moment situation. So we know this with evidence, and the evidence being his journal entries and also his verbal confessions that match up with those journal entries. So this takes us to the manner of death, which, let's be realistic, is clearly murder on all 5 counts. I think we can safely say with all of this evidence that Harvey had every intent to kill, and that's exactly what he did, which would definitely categorise the manner as murder. So usually if unsolved or further investigation was needed, we would be searching for weapons that had been used in the crime, but it seems that these were easily recovered. These being the machete-sized knife, the smaller knife with no reference to size, and the 1.2 metre metal pipe. If we were unsure who used those weapons, there are various testing methods that we could go on to chat about, but that's obviously not required here, so we'll save that for something to dive deeper into with another case. Other evidence that will have been recovered from the scene would be any serology, which covers any and all bodily fluids that can be retained from the scene for confirmation, such as the obvious one that you see on CSI, and the first one that comes to your mind is blood. So blood and blood stains like wipes or swipes to see where someone was killed, where they moved to. So the definitive difference between the two of wipes and swipes, wipes are being made with your hand, making the blood print. For example, your hand is covered in red paint and you wipe your hand on a white wall. The marks left are white marks, similar to those dirty ones on your nice white walls at home that your kids make when hanging off the walls constantly. I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but my kids are always putting their dirty hands on my nice clean walls. So that would be a wipe mark. A swipe, however, is slightly different. If you dropped a tub of red paint on the floor and you drag your fingers through it to leave finger line marks through that paint, like if you or your kids use their finger to wipe the last bit of ice cream from the bottom of their bowl, you see a squiggly line where a little finger has been, and that would be a swipe mark. So both of these would indicate different things. Not in this case so much, but those are things that we can jump into on another case, which would be really fun and exciting. So that moves us into segment 6, the verdict. Anthony Robert Harvey pled guilty to all 5 counts of murder. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Hall put incredible emphasis on the heinous nature of the crimes committed by Harvey, to which he struggled to find words that are adequate to convey the magnitude of his offences, to which he added that Harvey's actions were so far beyond the bounds of acceptable human conduct that they instill horror and revulsion into even the most hardened of people. Upon imposing the life imprisonment without parole, Justice Hall noted that this will be the first time such a sentence was handed down in the state of Western Australia. He justified this decision saying that the only appropriate punishment was a never-to-be-released order, which would reflect the magnitude of the offences. So to put that into perspective here, if you don't know much about sentencing and the legal system, the judge essentially ordered Anthony Robert Harvey a literal life sentence where he will never be released as long as he will live. That is huge. This case literally rewrote sentencing history. So usually I'll just go over Australia and the Australian states and territories. A life sentence in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia is 25 years. Tasmania is 20 years and Queensland is just 15 years, if you can believe that. On average, a life sentence in Australia is 13 years because we are considering parole. They may go up for parole, say 18 months before their sentence. These sentences, though, typically come with a mandatory non-parole period, which is essentially a set amount of time that the person has to spend incarcerated before they can be eligible for parole. And even after this period, the person may be eligible to apply for a parole, but that doesn't guarantee a successful application. So other crimes in Australia that will land you a life sentence are murder, manslaughter, aggravated sexual assault, drug trafficking offences, and acts intended to cause grievous bodily harm. Again, this is all subject to severity of the crime itself and other factors, and of course, what criminal law is applicable to each circumstance. For example, your lawyer, the nature of the offence, the criminal history of the person, and so forth. Segment 7, case discussion. Yay, I love a case discussion because, again, I can just have a little waffle. I have so much to say about this case. I was honestly so shocked to read about this. I didn't know what case to do first, and I knew I wanted to do one that had all of the facts there in front of us so that no one got too confused early on. I want you guys to progress, and we'll start here and we'll work our way up to some of the trickier crimes. And I was searching for Australian crimes, and I wanted Perth specifically because I actually wanted to go to the location and take a couple of photos and do a little post about it. But when I looked into this case, aside from the fact I was completely mortified at the story, the house has actually been destroyed for obvious reasons. So this case reminded me a lot of the American Nightmare case, which you may have watched on Netflix. If you haven't, please do. That is the Chris Watts case that I am talking about. If you would like reference to that, it reminded me of that. And I thought, how does the country not know so much about this case? You know, we know so much about cases like Chris Watts, who are in America, and he did this awful thing by killing his pregnant wife and his children. But here we have somebody in Perth who's done the exact same thing. And where is the news about this? Like, I'm sorry, this is just absolutely disgusting. This is the highest form of family and domestic violence, and this is something that needs to be everywhere. So I'll drop my little rant. I hope you feel the same way. If you do, let me know, and if you don't, let me know. I really like to talk about that because I do wonder what the media are doing a lot of the time. But anyway, so hopefully by now some of you have noticed I have started with a bit of a backwards case for the first episode. So by backwards, I mean the offender and the victims were known, and the police were referred to the crime by the offender himself. So it's all relatively straightforward in terms of evidence and analysis, and we really aren't analysing for the sake of answering questions, which is why I thought this would be a great case to start with, so that all questions that need answering are coming from you, they are answered by me, and we get the answers. I think that's a really nice, gentle way to start, while also learning about a case, again, that should be plastered all over the country. So with some cases that we might analyse in the future, they may have missing evidence or evidence that isn't particularly useful. We may not get the answers we want or the answers we need from the evidence or any answers at all. We might not know the offender. We might not know where the victim is and so forth. So when we open this case discussion, I want you to think a little outside of the box about this case, because while it is straightforward in understanding, it is, I believe, part of a much bigger issue in society, as I just said before, in Australia currently. So this case was in 2018, which is relatively hot. And by hot, I mean recent. And this is a time where family domestic violence in Australia was prevalent. I think it always has been for quite some time, but it was not as bad as what we're seeing in the media today. Or was it that bad and we were not seeing it in the media? I think that could possibly be the case here. So you can see how this podcast is going to help so many people when we are giving these cases the exposure that they need and the exposure that they deserve. I wish this case had been headlines everywhere, all over the country, all over the world. We might not have any remaining victims here, but there are existing family members of this family that was lost. This is an entire family, you guys, that have been lost. There's 3 little lives here that had absolutely no chance, asleep in their own bed at night where they're supposed to feel most safe and most comfortable, killed by their own father. Like I said, this is family and domestic violence in the highest form. But not only this and this discussion, but this is also about being aware and being proactive and having a sense of community, which is completely gone thanks to the internet. The internet can be such a great thing, but it can also hinder a lot. We need a sense of community, which can greatly benefit the reduction of crime. The more educated you are, the more aware you are, the more vigilant you are, the more likely you and those around you are going to seek appropriate help when needed. So even if we're starting conversations that we're aware are going to be incredibly difficult and uncomfortable, and we're asking a friend or a family member, hey, are you okay? We want a community where those people feel safe enough to be like, no, I'm not. Can you please help me? There are so many resources now. We can help you. And again, this podcast is going to help you find those resources. It's going to help you have those discussions. We're going to talk with people who have experienced family domestic violence. We're going to help cases of family and domestic violence where victims are still here or victims' families are still here. This is a huge one, you guys. And like I said, is it more prevalent now, or was it just as prevalent in 2018 without the exposure? That's something that I would like to look into further and maybe add into another podcast about family and domestic violence, because I just don't think that the media are doing their job the way they should be doing their job when it comes to things like this. Now, in terms of the sentencing, the historical sentencing, fantastic. Do I think it is warranted? It's iconic. It's fantastic. It's amazing. I'm often of the belief that most crimes in Australia go relatively unpunished. I think we're quite a soft country. I don't think we are very good in that sense. I often watch cases in other countries and think, God, they got the sentence that they deserved. The family got justice. The public have safety. And then I look at cases in Australia and I think, are you for real? 13 years for a life sentence? I don't think so. And if that were my family member, hell no. So yes, I completely agree with this ruling. I think it's incredibly suitable. I think the judge did a fantastic job. I'm often quite ashamed, as I said, of our sentencing when it comes to violent crime. And for a case like this, it just would have been far too risky for the safety of the public and the remaining family members of Maraquin for Harvey to be granted freedom on our streets, like ever. Personally, when I was going over these crimes with my partner and he was asking, how are you going to talk about these murders? And I said, I don't think I would even refer to this as, a mass murder. In my view and the cases I've worked on, I've seen some really awful things. But this hits home, I think, because I have young children. And I would honestly describe this case as a slaughtering. I say this because of the nature of the crimes, the way that he premeditated the acts, the way he executed the acts, and his behaviour both before and after the crime. I read one article in regards to this case that said that Harvey drank 2 glasses of wine in the hours leading up to the crime. Like, that shows me somebody who is relaxed, who is ready, somebody who wants to do this, and that is just sick. His numerous heinous actions show no regard for human life, and his journal entries support that. So, in my opinion, I would be absolutely shocked at any other alternative sentence for these crimes, and I am in complete agreement with the judge and his ruling. Before we get to the pointy end of the episode, I just want to remind everyone who is listening that all articles and journals that have been used to gather all of the information that make up this podcast will be referenced in our notes, just in case you wanted to do some further reading or have a look at some pictures, although we basically covered everything and more here today, plus my little side notes. In the notes, you'll also find a number of help resources if you find you or someone you know may need them. So any questions on this case, even about the science, or if I spoke about something you were unsure about, the evidence or anything as such, leave a question in our group. I don't care if you post with your name on it or anonymously, it's totally fine. If you want to have a private chat, you can send us a DM on Facebook or Instagram, or you can send an email to admin@exhumingthetruth.com. On an end note for this case, in a statement to the police, a family member spoke the following short statement, which I would like to end on to shine a light on the people that were lost and who they were as individuals who lived, loved, and were loved. The statement says, "There are no words to explain the emptiness and loss that we are feeling. This world is a sadder place with the loss of these 5 beautiful people, but heaven has gained 5 new angels. Beverly was a kind-hearted, caring mother and grandmother and was always there for her family. She was very much family-oriented and she loved her daughters and her grandchildren. She would have done anything for them. Mara loved being a mum. She loved her girls. She was so proud of each of them and was doing a great job of raising them. Her girls were her world. Charlotte was an energetic, bubbly, confident little girl who loved people and loved socializing. Alice was outgoing, adventurous and cheeky, while Beatrix was at times a little quieter, but she gave the biggest hugs." And I think this is a beautiful way for these individuals to be remembered. On to our final segment to lighten the mood, if you will, is segment 8, Forensic Fails. All right, so this week we have a forensic fail from the United States. One notable forensic fail is the Brandon Mayfield case in the US, which highlighted the dangers of flawed fingerprint analysis. In 2004, Brandon Mayfield, a lawyer from Oregon, was wrongfully arrested by the FBI in connection with the Madrid train bombings. Not a small crime. The arrest was based on a supposed fingerprint match found on a bag of detonators recovered near the bombing site. So what went wrong? Misinterpretation of evidence. The FBI's fingerprint analysis incorrectly identified Mayfield's print as a match, despite clear differences. Cognitive bias. Investigators were reportedly influenced by the fact that Mayfield was a Muslim and had previously represented a terrorism suspect, leading them to favour evidence that aligned with their suspicions. International discrepancy. Spanish authorities expressed doubts about the fingerprint match, but their concerns were initially dismissed by the FBI. Shocking. So the outcome, Mayfield was detained for 2 weeks before Spanish authorities conclusively identified the fingerprint as belonging to another suspect. He was released and the US government later apologised and awarded him a $2 million settlement. That's $1 million a week, I guess, for being detained. Not bad. Also not good, you don't want to be in that position. But the lesson learned here that this case underscored the risk of confirmation bias in forensic investigation. That is huge. So many investigators run with a bias and only pick up on evidence that match that bias, which is incredibly dangerous. But this prompted calls for reform and more rigorous standards in forensic science. Pardon me. I am absolutely pronouncing everything wrong. You will not believe how many times I've edited the end of this podcast. So it looks like I need to get a bit more practice in. So hopefully that will be in the form of more episodes. If you keep joining me and giving me cases that you'd like me to look at, I don't care if they're cold, I don't care if they're hot, missing persons, send me an email or a message and I'll have a look and get back to you. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it here. If so, you can subscribe to stay up to date on new episodes, or you can find us both on Instagram and Facebook. Please feel free to jump onto our Facebook group to join in on the case discussions. You can find the link to our group in the podcast notes. As always, stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, trust your instincts and keep seeking the truth.